right. Good afternoon, Zach Minkin.
Afternoon.
Thank you for coming in. It's about time that we figured this out. Both of your schedule is probably busier than my schedule is in the afternoons for sure.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm just happy that we finally are able to sit down and get this one in the books.
Yeah, let's get into it. And maybe we can start talking about the afternoon schedule because I know you wrote an op-ed in the Gilman News about the schedule. I don't know. Let's kind of hear your thoughts on the Gilman schedule and maybe some advice for, underclassmen coming through the ranks and how to take advantage of the freedom that Gilman students have. You have a lot of freedom. I said on the last episode with Mr. Hastings that sometimes the freedom is really, really good because it prepares you for college and you can get things done and sort of figure your day out. But sometimes it's like, I don't know, I could sit on my phone and game for 2.5 hours, which I don't love to see in my study hall. I think it's bad for the school. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so the op-ed or the opinion piece was kind of talking about what the opportunity of the afternoons presents. Like I tell people from McDonough and other schools that we don't have classes in the afternoon, and they're shocked. And it is kind of surprising. How do we not have classes? Well, as you said, it presents us with so much free time. Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of sad. What I wrote about is that people don't seem to be taking advantage of that opportunity to explore, to do clubs, to see teachers, to spend time with your friends. A lot of times people seem to just leave Gilman because they don't think of the afternoon as really part of the school experience. But for me, I think the most enriching part of my Gilman experience has been what's been in the afternoon. So the classes have been obviously tremendous, but the afternoon and the freedom that it presents just gave me the opportunity to explore and lead and learn, I feel like, more real life tangible skills that I can apply in college and beyond.
Now, how'd you figure that out? Did you figure that out right away? Did it take some time? The schedule's been like this for you since freshman year, right? Before, when I first came to Gilman, I guess 6 years ago, what we had was the bump period, which was like a 45-minute class. I don't even know if it was every day, but third period took place after lunch, and then there was this bump period for 45 minutes some days. And I sort of liked the 70-minute period. It was, sometimes 80 minutes is a long time.
At the end.
Especially third period, trying to get my class into what were we talking about today? We're talking about Battle of the Bulge and D-Day, and which it's really interesting stuff. And I'm coming into that class super excited about it. But if you sat through 80 minutes times 3, I can see how you'd be ready for lunch.
I mean, honestly, with the lunch schedule the way it is now, it should almost be moved to 12:30 because I feel like every time I'm with my friends, we have a free period for third period. I'm like, 12:30, we got to get to lunch because when 12:40 rolls around, it's completely full in the dining hall. So, but I think that in terms of your question, how did I get involved in so many different things? In middle school, me and my friend Jamie Howard, we did a bunch of clubs. We did the Political Awareness Club, which then became the Model UN Club for the middle school. And those club meetings were during lunch. So when we came to high school and we realized that we had these 2 hours to do lunch meeting or club meetings, it was so exciting for us. So we started the Model UN Club, which was a passion of both of ours. Mm-hmm. And then I started exploring some other things. So Model UN, I joined. And at that point, Manav Parikh, who was an excellent leader, he kind of showed me the way. And he was probably one of my role models, especially freshman year, just to learn what to be like a club leader, to uphold yourself. I always remember him in meetings. He seemed like he was 45 years old, and the rest of us were like babies compared to him.
Yeah.
And then joining the Gilman News, even though freshman year was COVID, so it wasn't quite the same. Still, the idea of being in a newspaper, producing stuff that people actually read, all of that excited me. And then I was able to maintain that schedule for the next 3 years.
Yeah, I think that's great. And let me just jump in and ask you a little bit about Gilman News, because I know that's been a huge focus, and I think you guys have done a great job with the newspaper because, before it was a great product a couple years ago, but now it's, robust, and there are many articles, and you've made a lot of changes with the paper. What can you say about that?
Sure. I remember when I was a sophomore looking back on our archives and seeing these newspapers that were just tremendous in quality. And I was looking at the newspapers we were producing, and I was like, I think we need to return a bit to that level of excellence. And I think that COVID really significantly hurt the newspaper just in terms of students kind of stopped joining the newspaper after COVID. It was a major loss of talent. And with the newspaper, you rely on your editors, but you also rely on contributors to actually write really good articles. And the whole newspaper, you need news, you need articles. So this year, I decided that we needed to really focus on upholding the quality that we had established like 5 years ago, and using those newspapers as examples. What should articles look like? They should look like, what we're asking questions. We should be presenting the readers, the students, the faculty, the alumni with questions that we're trying to answer that are thought-provoking, things that people want to read, and also things that maybe people haven't thought about before. And they open the newspaper and they're like, I didn't think about that, but now that Jamie Howard or John Cameron wrote an article about who our biggest rival is, I'm now thinking, is it McDonough? Is it Loyola? My goal was to strike a balance between what a student would want to read. Like, we wrote an article about Fortnite. A student probably will want to read that. But then, what are we sending to alumni? What news stories do they find interesting? And what about the teachers? Because, of course, it's a student-run newspaper, and we're serving the students first, but there's also so many other readers involved, and we want to grow our readership. And I think for the contributors to see that people were actually like looking at the newspaper, reading the newspaper, excited about when the newspaper came in the mailbox, I don't think we're fully there yet, but I think we're on the right path.
Why don't you think you're fully there yet?
I think that our quality has gone up a lot, which is great.
Yep.
I just think that there's still not an attitude, just people are excited to, like, students I'm talking about are excited to open their mailbox and see a newspaper, but there's still a lot of people that aren't. Like, if you go up to the mailboxes right now, I would guess there's probably 30% of the mailboxes still have a newspaper in there. The goal should be that everyone, when they see that newspaper in their mailbox, they take it out and they actually read it. I think some of that's with people don't read newspapers anymore in general.
Yeah.
Not just the Gilman News. But I think some of that is still that, people were like, oh, the Gilman News. I want people to say, oh, the Gilman News came out. I want to see what they wrote about.
Right. I think also maybe, and I'm guilty of this because I don't always check my mailbox. So that could,
that's true.
I found a Gilman News in my mailbox the other day and I wanted to read it. But that's part of it too.
I think so.
The distribution, I mean, that's the easiest way to hand them out.
Yeah.
But
We've talked about that. Like Miss Bala said, who's one of our advisors, she said that we should hand it out during assemblies. And I like that idea, just so you have like the person-to-person interface. So you're like, here's a newspaper. It's harder for people to say, no, I don't want that. People will be like, oh, newspaper, great. And as you said, not everyone checks their mailboxes. But I think with the mailbox, you're handing it to every single student in theory. Like with assembly, 20 people could be sick that day, and then so we've done the mailbox method. So I think maybe it's time for a change, but that will be up to the next year's crew.
Well, it's interesting. I think about this all the time with the reading I give out in English and history class, because sometimes you could say read this for homework, and I feel like a lot of students, they'll read it for homework 20 minutes before the next class, and they'll rush through it, and they don't actually read it. And I'm finding that setting aside 20 to 25 to 30 minutes of class, it's a big chunk of your class, but devoting that to in-class reading, sometimes, not all the time, that really works, because then you have no choice but to sit in silence and read. It's right in front of you. You have no excuse not to read it. And then we can talk about it. And I don't know, I wonder if that could happen in some fashion with the newspaper, but It might be tough. I mean, it's a lot.
Maybe.
Assembly is overwhelming. There are a lot of kids in there.
Very overwhelming. Yeah, it's something that we've talked about a lot and something that we'll continue to talk about. I think with the graduation issue, it's usually pretty successful because we're handing it out in person to the parents and the people at graduation. But at the end of the day, I think it's just, is the product exciting, and are people talking about the newspaper? Is it somebody in the hallway or in the lobby or the common room is like, look at what they wrote about, this is crazy, or this is really interesting, or they covered me and my team in the newspaper, and I really appreciated that. I'm going to read it more. So I think bottom line, it is about the product first, and the distribution is secondary.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, how do you decide what goes on the cover, first page?
So, I mean, it's a Gilman News, so I'm trying to find stories that are kind of breaking, newsworthy. So, for an example, last issue, Ethan Durman wrote an article about the 5th grade moving to the middle school in 2025, I think. So that, to me, was not like the most flashy piece of news that a student's going to pick that up and be like, wow, that's incredible. But it did feel like a more of a we're breaking that news kind of thing. So I moved that to the front. Sometimes it's just a really well-written article that's a really good product. I know the wrestling article last time was also news breaking. That just seemed like a cover-worthy achievement by the wrestling team that I wanted to have as a cover. And then there was that Fortnite article that we did that was a cover piece, and that was kind of like, let's try and do clickbait a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, get people to look, Fortnite, I got to look at this. But it's really about the quality of the piece, the newsworthiness of, is it breaking, or just, what's the tone of that issue.
Gotcha.
It's kind of like a conversation that me and Miss Bala and Mr. Slutkin and Mr. Zealand have.
I think, something you're probably considering too is like when you look at the archives of the Gilman News, and I've done that. I've looked in the past articles. You usually look to the cover first to sort of figure out what was going on during that period of time. And something like the 5th grade moving to the middle school is something, when people look at the archives in 25 years, that's important news to have on your front page.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, with the newspaper, it's just like, it's such a cool thing to look at because it really does paint a vast history of our school from the student perspective. And one thing I've been trying to do is to go in those archives and try and find an article that I really like and then print that again to kind of just showcase that there's, I'd say, probably 500 editions of the Gilman News that are in archives, and that they're really interesting to look at if you're just generally wondering like what was happening in 1975, or like there was something on the O.J. Simpson trial that was pretty controversial that they did, and it's just interesting to look at what were students like back then, really, and it gives you a great taste of that.
Yeah, so I feel like the Gilman News crew, and I've got a lot to say about the Model UN group and a little bit of the mock trial, but the Gilman News crew, I feel like you guys have your pulse on what students are talking about, what they care about, and what is going on at the school. I mean, you have to in order to write about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is owed to like James Zink and John Cameron, and they, especially John, has been like, we need to cover things that students are more interested in. It's not like conservative versus liberal, but it's like, let's do stuff that alumni would enjoy reading. And he's like, no, we need to do a lot of stuff that students like. So one example of that was like, we started doing this thing called Hound's Hot Takes.
Yeah, I like that.
So it's just going around to different students and asking them, what's your hot take? What's your take on whatever you want to say, printing that. So then the person who said something is like, wow, look at me, I'm printed in the Gilman News. And then everyone else gets to see what outlandish opinion some student has. So I think we do a good job of trying to have a good pulse on the school. But I mean, as a senior, I'm kind of the oldest of everyone. So I rely a lot on contributors to be like, this is going to be good for freshmen and sophomores to read. They're going to want to read that. And another discussion we have a lot is the length of articles. So whether we want it to be more short form, like biting, like quick reads, or do we want more long form articles? And John and some other writers are like, well, if we keep them shorter, more to the, less fluff. And I'm not saying there's necessarily fluff in long pieces, but just more direct. People will want to read that because it's, quicker to read.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of have to balance the clickbaity things like the hot takes and the Fortnite cover and stuff like that with maybe the longer articles about what's really happening on the ground at Gilman. So I imagine that's a lot of the conversation and the decision making that goes into being an editor is how do we arrange this newspaper so there's a good balance, right? Because you don't want all clickbait, right? Because then there's no depth to what you're writing about. But you also need to keep up with the times. I mean, why would I read the Gilman News when I can look at my Twitter feed, right? And just get those 2 sentences of stirring the pot information. So I love the hot takes idea. It's perfect.
That was a really good idea. And we started doing like restaurant reviews, movie reviews. I think that's stuff that, you would like to read, like a student that go to, like Ronik Sharma does a great job. He did like a Dave's Hot Chicken review, and Jason Gay, who came in to speak, he was reading our newspaper, and he was like, that Dave's Hot Chicken review really made me want to go to Dave's Hot Chicken and try some chicken, that seems to me a huge compliment that a journalist for the Wall Street Journal is saying that your food review is that good that it convinced me to go try this place Dave's Hot Chicken I hear is pretty good, but it's not the most flashy place, but the way that Ronik wrote it was so persuasive that somebody like Jason Gay was like, that sounds like a good spot to check out.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea too. I actually, the movie review was interesting because James Zink is on the JV lacrosse team, and he wrote about Napoleon, which I liked it. It was entertaining. I saw it in theaters. It was maybe not the best historical film I've ever seen, but in terms of sheer entertainment, I loved it. And at least it started a dialogue between myself and Zink about, hey, man, I actually liked that movie. And he was like, oh, it was terrible. So I think one of the things you guys try to do, and you do a great job, is starting conversations, and at least making people aware of different things that are going on campus, in the world, in pop culture, so that people in the community talk to each other a little bit.
Really, I think should be the goal, and is the goal, at least my goal. I think the worst possible thing that could happen to this school is that people are so on their phones, on their technology, so individual that all escapes. There's no more conversation. There's no more debate outside the classroom. I mean, in the classroom, there's always going to be discussion, but what happens in the passing periods? There's been a lot of, at least in the Ford advisory, we discuss a lot of, should we try this or that? And one of the things we've talked about is, should we be discussing banning phones at school? And I think it's a pretty hard ask of students, but at the same time is such a benefit to our community to have people out of their phones and talking to people that makes a community. And right now I think we do a pretty good job, but it could certainly be improved. So part of that, the newspaper, I guess, is people are off their phones reading the newspaper, discussing. And I think another thing is like trying to find articles where you can tie it to Gilman in a hook, like this happened at Gilman and now let's talk about it in a broader understanding.
Yep.
And Mr. Slutkin talks a lot about how we need to make sure that every article is relevant to Gilman, because you have the Wall Street Journal, you have the New York Times. They're all great at reporting on political stuff. They can write about the Trump trial, but the Gilman News can write about Gilman issues. So you have to focus on your strength and focus on what we actually are experts at.
Right.
So I thought that was something that in last year and the year before we had kind of lost.
you were writing about things too far outside of
Yes,
the
yeah.
Gilman community. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, why would I read Zach Minkin's review of Joe Biden when I could read whoever else's review of Joe Biden who's been in politics for 50 years? And that's fair. I mean, on one hand, it is kind of interesting to read what students think, and there's certainly room for student perspectives, but the newspaper should be mainly Gilman-centric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Now, if I were asked, what is your hot take, Jake Scott, I would say phones should be banned at Gilman from 9 a.m., actually 8 a.m. when you walk in. So I'm not in charge of Gilman, but I would have assembly at the beginning of the day when people are fresh, right? You come into school, you sit with your advisory, everyone gets checked in, attendance is spot on. If you're late, we can account for you. You turn in your phone right before assembly, maybe you come into the auditorium, turn in your phone, you get the attendance taken. And then I think 2 classes, lunch. After lunch, we do a third period and then bring back that bump period or something else academic, maybe a health class of some kind. Seminar, I think mandatory seminar during that time. And all at the same time, no one has their phone. And you don't get your phone back until 3 o'clock or maybe 2:30 or something like that. And I don't see why we wouldn't do that.
Yeah, the middle school does it. You have to keep your phone in the lockers in the middle school.
Yeah.
So,
and schools are doing it across America. I mean, not a lot of schools, but a handful of private schools, public schools are doing that, are collecting phones. And I feel like the mental health evidence of social media and just the dangers of, having your phone on you at all times for a lot of reasons, mentally or just socially, that's all been reported on and talked about. And it's like a pressing issue.
Yeah.
I just don't see why we wouldn't do that.
There doesn't really seem to be that many negatives to I guess one would be like communicating with your family.
Right, and I think that is. I mean, that's what I've heard is that parents need to be able to talk to their kid.
I mean, today I was texting my mom about getting Gatorades for the golf team, but I wouldn't say that on the daily I need to call my parents, or I guess for underclassmen. But if you give them back their phones at 3 o'clock, then that's like, Mom, pick me up, Dad, pick me up. But I agree. I don't see a negative to having the phones taken away.
Yeah, and what's wrong with the classic email to attendance or the front office? Hey, Miss Hammer.
Yeah.
Zachary has a doctor's appointment at 1:30. Can we please pick him up then?
Yeah.
Bam. And then
that's how the lower school and middle school does it. I mean, it's not like these are foreign ideas. We've done this at the same school, and then in high school, it's like freedom.
Yeah.
Freedom to have a phone.
Yeah, and they're so addictive. I mean, obviously we're all probably in some ways addicted to our phones, certainly. Right? And they're great, but it is sort of depressing to me walking into a classroom of students and they're not talking to each other. And I made a deal with my third period English class. I said, there's a 10 to 12 page research paper coming up at the end of the year, but we can scrap it if I come into class and no one's on their phones. And
good deal.
It's worked so far. I mean, I just want them to talk to each other about something else, and get to know each other a little bit.
Yeah, and I think as a senior, in a second semester senior, kind of wrapping things up, like in my law and lit class, it seems like people are naturally doing that. Like I go to class at 11:05 for third period, and I'm in between passing time, talking with Brooks or some of the girls at Bryn Mawr RPCS, just to spend time with people, because now it feels very fleeting. Time feels like it's going by. You have what's the point of being on your phone when you could get to know somebody or just have a better time just joking around? I think now it really, I start to think about that a lot more now. But even last year, in Mr. Rowell's class, that group of students was really a great community. It felt because we were, talking to each other before class, and that's how classes really, become strong is when, not when Mr. Rowell says, okay, discuss this, but before class, you're like, what do you think about this reading? I remember last year we would talk about chapters of the reading and like debate before Mr. Rowell even showed up, and then Mr. Rowell would be like, what are you guys talking about?
Yeah.
And then I just think that's a really special thing in this community to have that, and everyone's capable of doing it. You just have to try and, put that effort into it.
Yeah. Oh, I wonder if banning the phones is possible now that the cat's been out of the bag and everyone's had the time since COVID to have their phone during class. Is it too late, do you think, to say, no, we're collecting those at the beginning of the day?
I think it's possible.
What about the kids who bring in their old burner phone, they put it in, then they have their other phone?
There might be a few of those, but that's not a reason to say no to a good idea, because a couple people are going to try and outsmart it. And then those kids are going to realize I'm the real loser. And they're going to be like, look at me, I'm on my phone watching brain rot Instagram reels that have no meaning in life while everyone else is enjoying their experience. And then everyone will get around to it eventually.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
it's a new trend.
I would love to see an experiment with this, though, maybe before it was
a test case.
Like a month and led by the seniors. It might be too late this year to do, but maybe if it was just 2 weeks, those
last 2 weeks.
I remember, and they probably still do this, but saving electricity one day, you just don't.
Brownout.
Yeah, brownout. You don't use any electricity. Something like that with phones would be great.
For like a week or something. Yeah, that's. I think I remember talking about this during lunch. That was something that the student council was thinking of doing. I'm not on the student council. I don't know what's happening with that, but maybe that's something we'll do in the last week of school. Just seniors no phone. I think that would be great. Just
to see what it's like and collect some, data and some anecdotal evidence. Oh, I talked to a new person today. Wow. I think that's great. All right, Zach, let's transition a little bit. I want to hear about your experience in the play and what that was like. It was the first time acting. I was blown away by your performance, but I'm wondering how you did that, what that was like. Did you enjoy it?
It was an incredible experience. I enjoyed it a lot. It was really fun to be on the stage. I've always been told I could be a good actor by my family, some of my friends. It was challenging at times to put on an act to be somebody else. Was kind of hard to kind of, like on Sunday, the last day of our show, the Ravens had just lost to the Chiefs. Mm-hmm. We were coming back. It was me and Patrick Ryan in the car together. We were fuming over losing that game, devastating. But we had to put on a show.
Right.
In an hour, we had to be Cornelius Hackle and Malachi Stack, who was Patrick. So I think it was a really fun experience to try something I'd never done before. And it was like a team atmosphere, kind of. It was like everyone was trying to produce this thing so that people could laugh. And I think Mr. Rowell, before the last show, he was like, everyone's probably coming after the Ravens game, and we've all experienced it, and everyone's kind of down. Let's lift people up with comedy and joy for the next hour and a half and make people forget about the Ravens just losing a terrible game.
Yeah.
And that was like, that's a good idea. That seems like something good.
It's a good pep talk.
Yeah, and it was just like a lot of fun to just be an actor and just. I had a great time, and it was luckily I didn't have to memorize anything. I'm not that great with memorization, so it was a scripted reading or a staged reading. But it wasn't just like us sitting here reading it. It was actually acting it out, but we had the script in front of us.
Right.
So I kind of memorized some of the lines by the end of it, but it was nice to have that crutch where in case I forgot something, I wouldn't just be standing up there silent. So it was a great first play.
Yeah.
An introduction to theater.
Now, how did you decide to do this? I mean, you're already pretty booked. You're in mock trial, Model UN, Gilman News. You've got a full schedule. Why decide to take up act? I mean, you said that people have told you before that you'd be a good actor, but still, that's a big investment of your time and energy.
Well, I wasn't doing a winter sport, So I had a free time in the afternoon, and I guess I just like to be busy and do things. And, senior year, you got one more shot. Jamie was thinking about doing it. Jamie's one of my closest friends. And Mr. Rowell, who was my English teacher last year, was asking me to do it. And so all of those combined, I was like, okay, I'll try it. I try it out. And then I got actually a very sizable role, which was a little bit surprising.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, I guess I'll take this on. This is something to do in the afternoons. It's not that big of a time commitment, too. It was like a month because it was only a stage reading.
Right.
So we didn't have to memorize it. It was still a month of work, but it wasn't. It was like 2 hours after. It was like from 5 to 7, or no, 6 to 8 we would practice. So in between then I would get the work done, maybe go to Eddie's with Jamie, whatever, and then we'd show up and just run the play.
Yeah.
It was a really worthy use of my time.
Yeah.
And worked out.
Good experience too, whether you go into acting or not in the future, just to look back on your life and say, I did that in high school. I mean, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and with mock trial, a lot of it's acting. So
yeah.
And being a lawyer too, the jury has to like you, I guess. So better to be good at acting and bringing in the energy it will help in the courtroom, I guess.
That's a great transition to mock trial.
Okay.
Another thing to talk about. I'm a freshman. I don't really have many interests. I don't know what I want to do. I want to play, what's the game everyone's playing? Clash of Clans or
Clash of Clans.
My advisee plays something else a lot. Forget what it is, but he's always playing it.
Okay.
That's what I like to do with my time.
Maybe Brawl Stars.
Brawl Stars.
Okay.
Why should I come out for mock trial? What does it offer? And what has your experience been like?
Well, it offers tangible life skills. It's going to teach you how to, at least if you don't want to be a lawyer or whatever, you're still going to learn how to present yourself professionally in front of an adult who when you're in the mock trial themselves, you're in front of a judge who's either a lawyer or an actual judge. So you're learning how to uphold yourself and act with composure. And then you're learning how to collaborate and how to produce something that is persuasive. And it's also just fun to be part of a team that's not athletically driven, because not everyone is a great athlete. So for me, mock trial just provided me with a group of guys like Declan Ratchford, Nick Lutsky, Brooks Kitchell, Jamie Howard, Finn Tondro. Like, those were some of my. Alok Sinha was 1 year. Like, it just provided me with another outlet to just get closer with a bunch of people and travel and compete and sometimes win, which was nice. It's just offers leadership. It offers everything that you could probably ask in an activity, even if you just are in it for putting it on your resume's sake. It still is a worthwhile experience.
I would agree. And something you said that I think is important is, not everyone is a great athlete or not everyone is into sports. And I would add on to that is sports, as big as they are, as fun as they are, and as important and it emphasizes sports are at Gilman especially, sports don't last forever, I mean, you could play club sports or adult leagues. I'm in the men's lacrosse league up the street at Loyola on Sundays. Just fun. You get a little sweat in. But at times, I think that the emphasis on sports, not only at Gilman, just in our culture, is a little too much. It's a little overbearing. And I think you speak for the idea that you can get the same sort of experience in a team, in a highly pressurized situation, right? And also offer something that's actually real world applicable. How many of us are going to be in the NFL, right? How many of us are going to make it to the majors? Probably nobody, maybe one.
Maybe.
Right, maybe. So I think that's really important for Gilman and just, and everyone.
I will say that Gilman does a great job of supporting like mock trial, Model UN, other clubs, and non-sport activities in the arts. Like, I went to Mr. Smythe and asked if they could help fund the trip to Chicago that we went on, and they said yes without really any hesitation. They just said, the mock trial team does great stuff. You're going to represent the school well, and you're going to get something out of it, so we're happy to help. And it's a special place here because you feel the support that you have from the school to do stuff like go to Chicago on a weekend,
right,
and compete against schools from Florida and other places. And I think also like dealing with pressure. It's good to be in environments where you have pressure, and mock trial is one of those places where you don't want to mess up. You don't want to disappoint your teammates. So having experience with pressures that when you grow up and it really counts, that you have this experience to lean on, that's a huge plus for me. And something that it's taught me is just self-confidence, and my ability to memorize things and deliver it confidently has definitely benefited from mock trial.
Yeah, and I think it carries over into your classes too.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're spending your weekends in different environments where you're presenting things and standing up in front of people, you're not the person in class who's shy or scared to talk or scared to make a point on the book. Like, you're the first one to raise your hand, which I think is super important for you as a student.
Absolutely. I think that participating in classes and being an active listener and an active participant are huge. In every class I try, and sometimes I might be overly participatory, but I like to say what I like to talk.
Right.
If you couldn't tell, I
say
like
what's
to talk.
on your mind. Yeah.
I like to say what's on my mind, and I think that that's really important, to say what you want to say, and then sometimes you'll get challenged. And like
that's what makes it fun.
Yeah, in my AP US Gov class, we were talking about the Israel-Palestine conflict, which I don't need to tell you is pretty contentious. And, having discussions from people that completely disagree with me, and remaining respectful and cordial. And that's what being a citizen is like. That's what being a person in the real world is like. And I think in college, especially for someone like me who's Jewish, you're gonna have to experience that when you go to college. So you might as well, learn how to have conversations now, and maybe when you go to college you'll be either prepared to debate or be prepared to conversate. Mr. Molina, in like a seminar he talked about how to make sure that we're not debating people when there's settings that don't require a debate, like outside on the lawn at UVA. You don't need to debate someone. You can just have a conversation. In the classroom you can debate, but he talked about when is conversation the right method to communicate, and that's most of the time outside of structured academic debates.
Yeah,
which is an interesting idea.
That's a great point. I mean, I'm guilty of that sometimes too, because sometimes I like to present my case or open up an argument when it's maybe not the time, around the kitchen table with your family is maybe not the time, and other places are. So I think that's a really good point. Zach, let's talk, as we're getting to the end of the podcast here, let's talk about what's next for you. What are you excited about going into the last month of your senior year and next year, and what will you miss about Gilman? I think you've covered that pretty well so far, but any last thoughts about the future and maybe what you'll miss?
Oh, well, I'll miss a lot. I've been here for 14 years. It's hard to leave some place that you've been to for so long. I think there was I might have been watching a senior speech from another school or something, and the speaker said, like, I'm just grateful that I'm sad to be leaving a place. Like, that's a good thing, that you're sad to be leaving that place. And that makes a lot of sense. Like, it's totally bittersweet. At some point you had to leave Gilman, and about now seems like the right time, but it's also hard because there's so many things, like the newspaper and mock trial, that you need to put the final touches on before you say goodbye. Like, that's what I'm really focused on right now, is making sure that the Gilman News editorial staff for next year is ready, making sure that the mock trial team is ready, like James and Ethan and John are ready to go, and I want to let them know that I'll still want to help them out. I'll Zoom with them and help them through problems. But for right now, it's just trying to set it up so that I can go, kind of.
Putting the house in order.
Yeah, and like with Gilman News right now, we're trying to we're putting our graduation issue together, which will take a long time. It's 16 pages, is a big issue, and it's an important one because all the parents, there's probably we print out like 1,200 of them instead of the normal like 600. So that's probably the biggest project that I'm working on before I have to leave. Mm-hmm. And I'm excited for college and what opportunities I'll have and new challenges. Part of the reason why I wanted to go to like a bigger school was so that I was in an environment where I couldn't just be one of one, where there was a sort of like competition, not in the cutthroat, like I want to destroy my enemies type of thing, but like at Gilman, I can do the mock trial club and that's great, but I want to compete for a spot on the mock trial team. I want to compete to be the editor of an editor in the newspaper. Like, so I'm excited to continue the same endeavors in college and grow.
Love it. Yeah. Well, best of luck to you.
Thank
you. Yeah, it's really exciting. UVA is a phenomenal place. I mean, I've been down there a couple times and just gorgeous. So I'm excited for you.
Thank you.
Excited for the future. Last thing we'll talk about today is the book rec, Agatha Christie.
Yeah, and then there were none.
Okay.
That's my book recommendation. I think it was a 10th grade read. It was a group of books that we could choose from, and I recognized Agatha Christie. So I chose her book, and it was probably later in the summer. I was like, oh crap, I need to read this book. Sat down in my bed, opened it up, didn't really expect much. And I literally did not put it down until I concluded the entire book at like 3 a.m. or something.
Wow.
It was just such a good book. It's exciting, mystery. I can give a brief synopsis if you want.
Yeah, sure.
So it's basically this mystery island. There's like 10 people on the island, and it's one of them gets killed, and then you'll find out from there. But it's a really good page turner and just like a joy to read. And it was exciting, and I'm not the biggest reader, but when I enjoy the books that I read, like non-academic, this was just a really fun book. So I recommend anyone try it out. And it's not too long, and it's a great story.
Good rec. I've never read Agatha Christie really at all, so maybe I should pick this one up and yeah,
gift.
That'd be great. Well, Zach, thank you for the rec, and thanks for coming in. Wish you the best of luck, and thanks for all you've done for Gilman. You've really crushed it here, and we're sad to see you go. And even though I won't be here next year,
sad to see you go too, Mr. Scott.
Thank you. I would love to keep in touch with you. So
me too.
Thank you.